At the start of this session, we looked at a historical account of the driving forces of strong personalities and political positions that could have led to the UK water privatisation experience. We found this account to be incomplete, and instead also uncovered four main prerequisites in the local context of England and Wales. In the previous two videos, we've tried to assess the good news and bad news outcomes, as it were, from the UK water privatisation. We found no comprehensive account taking in all the necessary perspectives across a long enough period of time up to the current day. What evidence we did find on the England and Wales water privatisation case was rather mixed. In this final video for this session, we look at a further set of outcomes that don't fall into these already muddy good news and bad news categories. Here we'll look at outcomes that still seem unclear. They represent challenging questions to ask about the situation now, and about how the industry's development path may unfold in the future. First, some researchers, such as David Soul, Martin Cave and their colleagues, have tried to use certain standard economic tools to measure the efficiency trends of the England and Wales privatised water sector over time, using a range of available data. In 2007, David Soul, David Parker and Tom Wayman-Jones tried to determine the total factor productivity of the industry. This is one economic measure of the efficiency of an industry. The findings by Saul, Parker and Wayman-Jones fit into our unclear outcomes category, I think. There had been total factor productivity efficiency gains before privatisation in the industry, back from 1986 to 1990. But there were also gains after privatisation, from 1993 to 1996. But at the same time, there were also efficiency losses after privatisation, from 1990 to 1992, and again from 1996 to 2000. So there was no clear narrative there of the water industry was inefficient before privatisation and became efficient after privatisation. The picture's more nuanced. Separately in 2007, Fabrizio Ubetta and Martin Cave published a different kind of economic analysis. They used a data envelopment analysis, or DEA approach, to look at production frontiers in the England and Wales privatised water industry. Ubetta and Cave, like Saul and his co-authors, found little evidence of significant efficiency gains up to the year 2000. However, following a one-off price cap regulation intervention in 1999-2000, where allowed prices were cut by around 10%, Ubetta and Cave did find a modest jump in efficiency levels. Ubetta and Cave claimed this showed that regulatory intervention had been successful at this time in reducing technical inefficiency in the sector. However, their analysis runs only until 2005, so it's unclear whether, over a longer period, such as that adopted by Saul and his co-authors, there would be the same cyclical behaviour between short-term efficiency gains followed by some temporary efficiency losses. In their paper, Saul and his co-authors also looked at the possible effects of scale on efficiency in the industry. This would include mergers, acquisitions and diversification into other business areas. This graph shows their findings, again showing average total factor productivity growth rates over time. Saul and his co-authors here claim that, for the period from around 1990 onwards, this scale effect led to efficiency losses overall. Their point was that the behaviour of the water companies post-privatisation was not always successful here. Companies entered into businesses that were not their core area of expertise and probably lost money and efficiency as a result. This table shows amounts written off by 7 of the major privatised UK water companies, stated in millions of pounds sterling, from 1996 to 1999. They range from around the £300,000 level for a particular write-off in South West Water in 1999, all the way up to a £124 million cost for restructuring in United Utilities in 1996. Interestingly, there's also an £83 million write-off here by United Utilities, recorded for 1996-1997 for, quoting, problems with Bangkok contract. This write-off was equal to a third of United Utilities' pre-tax profits in the previous year. It was due to various contractual and construction problems and associated with political risks in Thailand at the time. The year earlier, Thames Water had also written off around £95 million due to unsuccessful overseas contracts and businesses. And after this period, most of the UK privatised water companies withdrew from much of their international water and sewerage business contracts. So is this evidence bad news? Will it in the longer term be possible to recoup some of these apparent scale effect and write-off losses? Or is there useful knowledge and experience to be gained from these business and contract experiments? Perhaps. After all, private businesses have to take risks. Some of these pan out, others do not. Instead, the appropriate metric here should be overall performance or return on capital. So perhaps we should not focus overly on this list of a few relatively modest commercial failures. Another area of debate is the balance between increasing capital investments to maintain or enhance service and environmental quality through the England and Wales privatised water and sewage companies' activities, or whether to be more mindful instead of the fact that water bills have risen above the UK rate of inflation for the majority of the period since privatisation, and may now be a risk to households in terms of water bill affordability. This table shows status quo and projected data on this capital spend and water bill balance. From 1990 to 2010, £85 billion has been invested in the capital spend for the England and Wales water companies. Over the same period, average combined household water and sewerage bills have been around £300 per year. With predicted future rates of capital spending of around £96 billion for the period 2000 to 2030, based on 2010 estimates in this report by Martin Cave and Severn Trent Water, average household bills may rise to £400 per year in the same 2010 prices. So will this be affordable? Since 2004, the official definition in England has been that a household is in water poverty if it spends more than 3% of its income on its water bill. According to Family Resources Survey data from 2009-2010, already around 24% of households in England and Wales were at this 3% threshold. So this is before the projected water bills increase over the next 2 decades. And from the same data, nearly 12% of households were spending 5% of their income on water bills. So is this projected long-term capital spending necessary for maintaining and enhancing water and sewerage services to customers, say in the face of climate change challenges and ever-rising policy, regulatory and consumer expectations around sustainability and environmental quality standards? Will there be innovations that might reduce the projected bill increases and the projected capital spending, but still deliver the same desired outcomes? We'll return to this innovation aspect in our final session. But we should ask here, whose responsibility is it to ensure that water bills are affordable, and that more households do not suffer from water poverty? If regulators set standards for the private water companies to meet that are too high, and water bills become unaffordable, does responsibility to remedy this situation lie with the water companies, or with the regulator? Or should the government itself be more mindful of affordability issues in the guidance it issues to the regulators that will affect prices? And there are other issues here, like welfare benefits to households and policy approaches to water metering of poor households. Should these be considered too? Various discussions are ongoing on all of these points. But I'd say overall the outcomes here of this affordability versus investment aspect of privatisation still remain unclear at present. Another balancing act is the ratio between equity investment and debt investment in the England and Wales privatised water industry. This plot, from the economic regulator Ofwat, shows Ofwat's preferred proxy measure for the market capitalisation, or total asset value of the England and Wales water industry. This is what Ofwat calls the regulatory capital value, or RCV. We can see here that the combined RCV for all the England and Wales private water companies has more than tripled since privatisation in 1989. But at the same time, the proportion of this value made up of equity, or the value owned by shareholders, has remained fairly flat over time, whilst the proportion of the value constituting net debt, or outstanding borrowing, is increasing dramatically over time. Given the world has just been through a major global economic recession from around 2008 onwards, that was in part fueled by subprime mortgage lending, where many individuals were loaned debt they couldn't afford, is this debt-fueled approach to the water industry's RCV growth really good news, or is it bad news? Ofwat's view on this is somewhat unclear. Ofwat seems less concerned about the direct risks of this level of debt or leverage. Ofwat, however, is concerned, is monitoring, and is putting safeguards in place against what they call the risk of contagion, in a case of, say, one or more water companies defaulting against their debt. So whilst you may have moral objections here to this situation, especially in our post-recession world, overall we think this is another unclear outcome of the water privatisation so far. A final area of unclear outcomes concern policy and practices towards competition in the privatised England and Wales water industry. You'll recall that the promise of a liberalised, competitive market was one of the political underpinnings of the broader privatisation programme, And, although there were some reservations about its feasibility in a natural monopoly setting like water, this was also true for the England and Wales private water companies. As of 2014, there has in fact been further consolidation. The combined 39 water and sewage and water-only companies of privatisation in 1989 have become just 18 regional monopoly companies now. The 10 main players have remained the same, whereas the 29 smaller water-only companies from privatisation have now become just 8 companies. This has mainly been due to mergers and takeovers involving the water-only companies. The 10 main players have been prevented from merging due to the requirements of benchmarked economic regulation, which we'll address in our next session. They have, however, undergone various changes of ownership. Over this time, there have also been 5 newly appointed companies and 8 new water supply licensees. In terms of a competitive ecosystem then, variety has reduced due to consolidation. However, there is still variety in terms of water company scale. Company annual revenues range from around £15 million in the smaller water-only companies up to £1.7 billion for some of the main 10 water companies. And the overall industry annual revenue here is about £10.5 billion. Some degree of competition for the non-domestic water and sewage business has existed, if only since around about 2010. This has meant that large water users, so typically large businesses, could choose their water supplier. And this is being rolled out for all businesses from around 2017 under current plans. This will mean over 1 million businesses and other non-household customers of water companies that are based mainly or wholly in England will be able to choose their supplier of water and wastewater services. The information website that's been created for this change, called open-water.org.uk, notes that this newly created water market, and I quote, will be the largest retail water market in the world, delivering around £200 million of overall benefit to customers and the UK economy. This competition promise has been a long time in the making, due to various legal and regulatory difficulties in separating out the functions of water companies. But it's worth stating that this new market is only for the customer services and billing side of the industry. In this diagram, we can see the parts of the England and Wales water industry overall value chain that the sector's economic regulator Ofwat thinks are potentially contestable. The value chain here is based on Modern Equivalent Asset Value, or MEA. Parts of this we can see are a natural monopoly, mainly the water distribution and sewage collection and transport networks. In other words, Ofwat thinks it would be uneconomic to duplicate these parts of the system. However, we can see here that Ofwat also estimates the non-domestic or business retail part of the system, shown here in the line in the bottom right orange box, is only 0.1% of the overall value chain. So is this new competitive market, mainly for retail and billing services to non-domestic customers, good news if it only affects 0.1% of the value chain? For some time, there has also been discussion about domestic households one day being able to choose their water supplier too. Say you're a water customer and you prefer to switch to a different supplier. Your decision may be based on price or customer service quality. At the moment in England and Wales, as a domestic water customer, you cannot choose your own supplier. In the future, this may become possible, particularly based on the policy learning and precedent set by the opening in 2017 of the competitive non-domestic water market. So will this be good news? Well, we can see again here from the plot that again, the household or domestic retail portion of the overall value chain is very small. Ofwat estimates it to be around 0.2% of the overall value chain. So I'd still say this is another unclear outcome, for the time being at least. We should also consider the flip side of competition, coordination. The sustainable management of water resources in the face of a changing climate, changing demographics, and changing population trends may require more coordination across the boundaries of the 10 main privatised water and sewage companies in England and Wales. Early progress on this issue has been modest. Regulation has permitted so-called inset appointments for many years. This is where cross-border water trading can occur between the existing privatised water companies. The business case here is that a modest cross-border connection cost to supply water from one company area to another is far more efficient and sustainable, and cheaper of course, for customers and for the country as a whole than developing entirely new water resources or building new pipe networks. And yet only a handful of these inset appointments, which again come under the purview of Ofwat, have been granted to date. To summarise, the UK water privatisation case is interesting to examine. It's a rare example of a large, full divestiture privatisation, and one that has persisted for more than a quarter century so far. It was also part of a wider British privatisation programme, or radical experiment, to quote again the words of Mr. Privatisation, John Moore. So it represents a context, a moment in time, a set of status quo conditions, and a dynamic baseline that might be hard to find again elsewhere in the world, now or in the future. The UK water privatisation case has also followed a specific path, and been path-dependent, due to certain local, specific prerequisites that were already in place before the privatisation took place. This point is important for anyone considering transferring this experience to elsewhere in the world, albeit, as Dale has already said, the willingness to do these kind of water privatisations internationally now has waned, compared to the excitement about it maybe some 2 decades ago. The UK case also represents one where there were 2 overlapping changes of institutions. The England and Wales water industry was privatised, but at the same time, based on important precursor organisations, regulatory institutions were created and/or developed. We've also seen that the England and Wales water privatisation involved significant political, administrative, regulatory and legal capacity and willingness. It was also a costly process, at least in the short term, and bearing in mind that we've seen mixed evidence on its good news, bad news and unclear outcomes. We've also seen that there's still learning going on. In particular, the regulatory approach that has been necessitated by ongoing developments in the England and Wales private water companies has needed to evolve. We'll look at this specifically in our next session, when we look both at water regulation issues and practices in lesser developing countries, as well as lessons that might be learnt from the UK's water regulation experience. Hopefully overall we've shown that recounting and assessing a historically detailed and institutionally complicated policy intervention, such as the UK water privatisation experience, is challenging. Doing so can inevitably raise new questions. Consequently, it's also a case on which opinions naturally may continue to differ. We've tried to present the available evidence as best as we can, but we leave it up to you to consider what other evidence you'd need to make perhaps a more balanced assessment here, and whether that might ever even be possible. We say that because we've seen various moral obligations embedded in the UK water privatisation case, and lingering concerns over the sector's legitimacy in the eyes of the public, politically, and in the media, in some cases for seemingly very good reasons, like tax avoidance and fat cat salaries of certain water company executives. But here we invite you again to reflect back on our ancient instincts regarding water privatisation, and to consider just how deep our feelings on this subject can be, and whether we're basing them on the overall evidence and good news, or not. Thanks for watching this video.